Good evening, and welcome to The Quiet Scientist. As the world outside settles into silence, allow yourself to breathe a little deeper, relax into your pillow, and let the noise of the day gently fade away. Wherever you are listening from this evening, it is a comfort to have you here. Whether you are visiting for the first time or returning once again, thank you for sharing this quiet moment. My hope is that what follows will be gentle enough to soften your thoughts, slow your breathing, and allow rest to arrive naturally. As we begin our calm drift through science and wonder. There are questions we carry with us that don't ask to be answered. They simply rest in the mind, quietly, like stones smoothed by water. Questions that have no edges sharp enough to demand resolution. Questions that seem content just to exist. And perhaps that is what they are meant to do. Just exist. Just be wondered about. Not solved, not settled, but held gently in the spaces between waking thought and the softer places we drift toward when the day releases us. One such question is this: what was before the Big Bang? It's not a question that arrives with urgency. It doesn't insist. It merely appears now and then when we look up at the night sky, or when we sit very still, or when we allow ourselves to wonder about beginnings, about where things come from, about what it means for something to start, if anything starts at all, if starting is even the right word. We're not sure, we may never be sure. But the question is there nonetheless. What was before the Big Bang? The question feels old. It feels like the kind of question humans have always asked in one form or another. Perhaps around fires, long before cities or writing. Perhaps in silence, watching stars move slowly across the dark. The question doesn't belong to science alone, though science has spent time with it. It belongs to anyone who has ever wondered, anyone who has felt the strangeness of being here in the middle of time, without knowing where time itself begins, or if it begins, or what beginning even means when we try to look that far back. What was before the Big Bang? We know in a certain sense what the Big Bang is supposed to represent. A moment, or something like a moment, when everything we observe, everything we can see or measure or imagine, was once compressed, gathered, contained, smaller than small, denser than we can properly conceive. And then, somehow, it wasn't. It expanded. It became space and light and matter and time. It became galaxies eventually, stars, planets, us, all of it apparently, beginning from that singular instant, or near instant, or whatever we ought to call it when language starts to tremble under the weight of what it's being asked to describe. But the question we're sitting with now doesn't ask about that. It doesn't ask what happened during the Big Bang, or after it. It asks what was before the beginning, before the expansion, before time, perhaps, before anything that we might recognize as existence in the way we understand it. What was before the Big Bang? It's a question that feels simple when you first say it. 5 words, a straightforward sentence. But the longer you hold it, the more it shifts, the more it seems to open rather than close. The more it becomes not a question with an answer waiting somewhere in the distance, but a question that might not have an answer at all. Or perhaps the kind of question that dissolves when you look at it closely enough. Not because it's meaningless, but because meaning itself changes shape when you press this far into the unknown. What was before the Big Bang? Some questions are like doors. You ask them, and they lead somewhere. They open onto explanations, onto chains of reasoning, onto things that can be tested or observed or thought through carefully until clarity emerges. But other questions are not doors. They are more like horizons. You can move toward them, but they move too. They remain distant. They don't resolve into something you can step through or stand upon. They simply stay there, at the edge of what you can think, inviting you to keep looking without ever promising you'll arrive. This question perhaps is a horizon. What was before the Big Bang? We might wonder why we ask it at all, why we feel drawn to it, what it is about beginnings that pulls at us so persistently. Perhaps it has something to do with our own experience of time. We live inside time, or at least it feels that way. We wake and sleep. We remember yesterday and anticipate tomorrow. We watch things begin and end. Seeds become trees, days become years, lives unfold and eventually cease. Everywhere we look, there are beginnings and endings, causes and effects, befores and afters. It seems natural then to assume that everything must have a before, that nothing can simply begin without something preceding it, that there must always be an earlier moment, an earlier state, an earlier condition. And so we ask, what was before the Big Bang? But perhaps the question reveals something about us, more than it reveals something about the universe. Perhaps it shows us the shape of our thinking, the patterns we rely on, the assumptions we carry so deeply that we don't notice them until we venture far enough into strangeness that they begin to crack. Time, for instance. We assume time. We assume it flows, that it has a direction, that it stretches backward and forward like a line or a river. We assume that before is a meaningful word, that it points to something real, something that exists in the same way that yesterday exists, or last year, or the moment just before this one. But what if time itself began with the Big Bang? What if there is no before, not because nothing was there, but because before requires time, and time had not yet started? Then the question, what was before the Big Bang, becomes something else. Not a question about what existed in an earlier time, but a question about whether earlier time is even a coherent idea. We're not trying to answer this now. We're only sitting with it, noticing it, feeling the way it resists easy answers, the way it asks us to slow down, to let go of the need for resolution, to be comfortable with uncertainty, or at least to try. What was before the Big Bang? There's something almost comforting about the question in a way, not because it brings comfort in the sense of safety or certainty, but because it reminds us how small we are, how much we don't know, how much we can't know perhaps. And there's a kind of peace in that, if we let there be. A peace in recognizing that not everything is meant to be understood, that the universe is under no obligation to make sense to us. That mystery is not a failure of knowledge, but a feature of existence. What was before the Big Bang? We can imagine cosmologists and physicists working on this question in their own way, building models, writing equations, proposing theories, quantum fluctuations, multiverse scenarios, cyclic universes that expand and contract over and over, endlessly, eternal inflation, theories where time doesn't begin but loops or branches or emerges from something more fundamental that we don't have words for yet. They're trying to think their way past the boundary, to peek behind the curtain, if there is a curtain, to find what might have been there, if there even applies. But even the most sophisticated theories brush up against the same strangeness, the same difficulty. They push the question back, perhaps, but they don't dissolve it. If the universe came from a quantum fluctuation, what was fluctuating? If it emerged from another universe, where did that universe come from? If time is cyclical, what started the cycle? Or has it always been cycling? And if it has always been cycling, what does always mean when time itself is part of the cycle? The question persists. What was before the Big Bang? Maybe it persists because it's not really about physics, or not only about physics. Maybe it's also about something deeper, something older in us. The need to find origin points, the need to trace things back to a source, the need to feel that there is a foundation somewhere, a ground beneath the ground, a place where things rest, where they come from, where they, in some sense, belong. But what if there is no final ground? What if every answer we find only opens another question beneath it? What if the universe is not built on foundations, but suspended somehow, in a way we can't quite picture? Not floating, because floating implies space. Not resting, because resting implies something to rest upon. Just there, or here, existing without needing permission from something prior. What was before the Big Bang? We sit with the question. We let it be what it is. We don't rush toward answers. We don't fill the silence with explanations that might sound confident, but only push the mystery further away, into smaller and smaller corners where we can pretend it doesn't matter. We let it matter. We let it remain open. We let it stay as wide and as strange as it actually is. What was before the Big Bang? Perhaps the question is less about finding an answer and more about learning to hold the not knowing, learning to sit in the presence of something that exceeds us, something that will not fit neatly into the categories we've built, the frameworks we use to organize the world. The Big Bang itself is already so far beyond ordinary experience that we can barely hold it in mind, and the before, if there is a before, is even further, even stranger, even more resistant to the tools we bring. And yet we ask, what was before the Big Bang? We ask because we are curious, because we are built to wonder, because the question is there and we are here, and wondering is part of what we do, part of what makes us human, perhaps. The capacity to look at the universe and feel awe, to feel smallness, to feel the vertigo of not knowing, and to keep looking anyway. What was before the Big Bang? There's no urgency in the question, no need to solve it tonight or tomorrow or ever. It can simply rest here, in the quiet, in the dark, among the other questions we carry, the other mysteries that don't demand answers, but only our attention, our willingness to wonder, our willingness to let go of certainty long enough to feel what it's like to not know. What was before the Big Bang? The question is an invitation, not to an answer, but to a kind of openness, a kind of humility, a recognition that we are part of something much larger than ourselves, something that began, or didn't begin, in ways we may never fully understand. And that's all right. It doesn't need to be understood to be real. It doesn't need to be explained to be here. We are here. The universe is here. The question is here. What was before the Big Bang? We let it rest. We let ourselves rest with it. We don't solve it. We don't chase it. We simply allow it to be present, the way the night sky is present when we look up. vast and dark and full of light from distant places, full of time stretched across unimaginable distances, full of beginnings we can see but not touch, not reach, not fully comprehend. What was before the Big Bang, we may never know, and perhaps that's part of the beauty, part of what makes the question worth holding, not because it will give us answers, but because it reminds us that there are things beyond answers, things that exist in the space between knowing and not knowing, things that invite us to wonder and to rest and to let the wondering be enough. What was before the Big Bang? The question remains, soft, open, patient, waiting perhaps, or not waiting, simply being, as the universe is, as we are, here in the quiet, in the vastness, in the gentle, unresolved mystery of it all. When we use the word before, we think we know what we mean. We use it every day, before breakfast, before sleep, before the sun rose this morning, before yesterday. The word feels simple, ordinary. It points backward in time, towards something that has already happened, toward a moment that came earlier than the moment we're in now. We don't usually stop to think about it. We don't need to. The word works. It does what we ask of it. But what does before actually mean? Not as a word in a sentence, but as an idea, as a concept we're leaning on when we ask what came before the Big Bang. What are we really asking when we use that word in this context? What are we assuming? What are we taking for granted before? The word suggests a sequence, one thing, then another, first this, then that, a flowing from earlier to later. It suggests that time is already there, like a stage, like a landscape through which events move. We imagine looking backward along this landscape, tracing our steps, moving from now to earlier, from earlier to earlier still, going back and back until we reach something we might call the beginning. And then we ask, what was before that? But what if time itself is not a stage? What if time is not a landscape we move through, but something else entirely, something that doesn't stretch infinitely backward, something that might have a beginning, or an edge, or a shape we can't quite picture? What does before mean then? The question sits quietly. We're not trying to answer it. We're only looking at it, turning it over slowly, the way you might turn over a smooth stone in your hand, feeling its weight, its texture, noticing what happens when you really pay attention to something you thought you already understood. Before, we use it to mean earlier in time, but time is not as simple as we sometimes imagine. We experience it as a flow, as something that carries us from past through present toward future. We remember what happened earlier. We anticipate what might happen later. The direction feels clear, unmistakable. But when we try to think about time itself, about what it is, the clarity starts to soften. Is time a thing? Is it something that exists independently, on its own, whether anything happens within it or not? Or is time something that only exists because things change, because events occur, because there is motion and transformation? If nothing ever changed, if everything were perfectly still and static, would there still be time? We don't know. We're not sure anyone knows. And perhaps that uncertainty is important. Perhaps it's telling us something. That time is stranger than we usually give it credit for. That the word before carries assumptions we might want to examine gently, without rushing to conclusions. What does before mean when we ask about before the Big Bang? If the Big Bang marks the beginning not just of matter and energy and space, but of time itself, then before might not apply. Not because there was nothing necessarily, but because before requires time, and time had not yet begun. It's like asking what is north of the North Pole. The question seems to make sense grammatically. The words are arranged properly, but the meaning dissolves when you look closely. North is a direction defined by moving toward the North Pole. Once you're there, at the pole itself, north loses its reference point. There is no more north, not because you've hit a wall, but because the concept no longer applies. Perhaps before the Big Bang is like that. Not a question that has an answer we haven't found yet, but a question that reaches the limit of its own applicability. A question that bumps against the edge of what questions can do. But we're not certain of this. We're not certain of anything when we venture this far into the unknown. We're only noticing, only wondering, only sitting with the possibility that the word before might not work the way we need it to work, that it might be asking us to imagine something that doesn't exist, not because there's nothing there, but because there itself might be the wrong idea. What does before mean? We might try other words. We might try to rephrase the question. What existed prior to the Big Bang? What was the state of things earlier than the Big Bang? What came ahead of the Big Bang in the sequence of events? But every rephrasing carries the same assumption, the same reliance on time as something that flows, that extends, that allows for a prior or an earlier or a sequence. Every rephrasing asks us to imagine time stretching backward, past the Big Bang, into something that came before it. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that's the only way we can ask the question. Maybe our language, our thinking, is so deeply rooted in time that we can't escape it, that we can't formulate questions about ultimate beginnings without using temporal concepts, even if those concepts might not apply. We are creatures who live in time, or seem to. We experience duration. We experience change. We can hardly think without thinking in terms of before and after, cause and effect, earlier and later. So when we ask what was before the Big Bang, we're doing the best we can with the tools we have, with the language we have, with the minds we have, even if the question might be pointing towards something our tools can't quite reach. What does before mean? Perhaps we can sit with the not knowing, with the possibility that the question contains its own kind of mystery, not just in the answer, but in the asking itself. That before might mean something we haven't imagined yet. Or it might mean nothing at all in this context. Or it might mean something in between, something subtle, something we're only beginning to glimpse. There are theories, of course, ideas proposed by people who have spent years thinking about time and space and the origins of the universe. Ideas that try to make sense of what might have been before, if before is even the right word. Some suggest that time is not linear, but circular, or branching, or emergent from something deeper. Some suggest that the Big Bang was not the beginning of everything, but only the beginning of this particular universe, this particular bubble of space and time within a larger structure that has always existed. But even these ideas don't escape the question. They only move it. If time is circular, what set the circle in motion? If the universe emerged from something deeper, what is that deeper thing, and where did it come from? If our universe is one among many, what is the nature of the multiverse, and did it have a beginning? The question persists. What does before mean? We might also wonder whether the question is even about time. Maybe when we ask what was before the Big Bang, we're not really asking about temporal priority. Maybe we're asking something else, something more like, what is the explanation for the Big Bang? What caused it? What is the reason it happened at all? But causation too relies on time. A cause comes before an effect. That's what makes it a cause. So if time began with the Big Bang, then the idea of a cause for the Big Bang becomes just as strange as the idea of a before. We're caught again in the same difficulty, the same quiet unraveling of concepts we thought were solid. What does before mean? Perhaps it means something different in different contexts. Perhaps before is not one thing but many things, depending on what we're talking about. Before lunch is one kind of before. Before I was born is another. Before the invention of language is another still. Before the formation of the earth. Before the first stars. Before the Big Bang. Each of these uses the same word, but the meaning shifts subtly as the scale changes. As we move further back, as we approach the edges of what we can verify, what we can observe, what we can even coherently imagine, and at some point, perhaps, the word stretches too thin. It begins to tear, not because we're using it wrong, but because we're asking it to do something it wasn't designed to do. We're asking it to reach beyond the realm of events unfolding in time, into something that might not be a realm at all, something that might not unfold, something that might not be. What does before mean? We're not going to settle this. We're not going to arrive at a definition that feels complete. That's not what we're here for. We're here to sit with the question, to notice how it feels when we hold it, to see what happens when we don't rush past the uncertainty toward the comfort of an answer, even a provisional one. What does before mean? There's a kind of freedom in not knowing, a kind of openness. When we admit that we don't know what before means in this context, we stop pretending. We stop acting as if the question is simpler than it is. We acknowledge the mystery. And in that acknowledgement, something shifts. The question becomes less about finding the right answer and more about being present with the strangeness, with the limits of language, with the limits of thought. What does before mean? Maybe it means possibility. Maybe when we ask what was before the Big Bang, we're asking what possibilities existed before the particular reality we inhabit came into being. What might have been, instead of what is. What other configurations of existence could have unfolded, if unfolding is the right metaphor? If metaphor itself is adequate to the task? Or maybe before means potential. Not potential in the sense of something waiting to happen, but potential as a kind of state, a condition, a way of being that is not yet actual, but not quite nothing, something suspended between existence and non-existence, something that doesn't fit neatly into the categories we use to divide the world into things that are and things that are not. But these are just words. Just attempts to gesture towards something we can't quite see. We don't know if they're right. We don't know if they're meaningful. We're only exploring, only feeling our way through the darkness, carefully, without expecting to find a light switch. What does before mean? Perhaps the word means something like context. Perhaps when we ask what was before the Big Bang, we're asking for the context in which the Big Bang occurred, the conditions, the environment, the larger framework. But this too assumes something like space or time or structure within which the Big Bang could be situated. And if the Big Bang brought space and time into existence, then there may be no context, no framework, no environment in any sense we can recognize. Or perhaps there is, but it's so unlike anything we know that our words fail entirely. That before and context and condition are all hopelessly inadequate. That we're trying to describe something that can't be described. Not because it's too complex, but because it's too different, too foreign to the patterns of thought we rely on. What does before mean? We return to the question, again and again, not because we're stuck, but because the question is worth returning to. Because each time we approach it, we notice something slightly different, a different angle, a different nuance, a different way in which the question resists us, gently, refusing to be pinned down. What does before mean? Maybe it doesn't mean anything in this context. Maybe the question, what was before the Big Bang, is like asking what sound silence makes or what color emptiness is. A question that seems to ask something, but actually points to a confusion, a category error, a misapplication of concepts that work perfectly well in their proper domain, but break down when extended too far. But even if that's true, the question still feels meaningful to us. It still pulls at us. We still want to ask it. We still want to wonder. And perhaps that itself is worth noticing, that we are drawn to questions even when we suspect they might not have answers, that we are curious even in the face of the incomprehensible, that we reach toward the unknown even when the reaching might be futile. What does before mean? We let the question hang in the air. We don't force it toward resolution. We don't demand that it make sense. We allow it to be what it is, a question at the edge of meaning, a question that might teach us something, not through its answer, but through the asking itself, through the way it reveals the limits of our understanding, the boundaries of our concepts, the places where language begins to fail and thought begins to dissolve into something quieter, something more like wonder than knowledge. What does before mean? We sit with it, in the quiet, in the uncertainty. We let it be difficult. We let it be strange. We don't turn away from the strangeness. We stay with it, not because we expect clarity, but because staying with difficulty, with mystery, with the unknown, is its own kind of practice, its own kind of presence. What does before mean? The word floats, unmoored from certainty, unmoored from definitions, just there, in the space between us and the question, between the question and whatever lies beyond it, if anything lies beyond it, if beyond even makes sense. What does before mean? We don't know, and we rest in the not knowing. What does before mean? We ask again, not because we've forgotten, but because the question deserves to be asked again, because asking is a way of staying present, a way of not rushing past the difficulty towards something easier, something more comfortable. We stay here, with the word, with its strangeness. Before, such a small word, such a common word, and yet, here, in this context, it becomes something else. It becomes uncertain. It becomes a question itself, not just a word within a question. We thought we knew what it meant. We thought we could use it confidently. But now we're not so sure. What does before mean? When we say the word slowly, when we let it sit in our mind without rushing to apply it, it begins to feel unfamiliar. The way any word does when you repeat it enough times. It loses its automatic quality, its transparency. It becomes visible as a word, as a collection of sounds, rather than disappearing into the meaning we usually assign to it. Before, before, before. What are we really pointing to when we use this word? What assumption are we making? We're assuming time, certainly. We're assuming that time flows in a direction, that it has a past and a future, that we can look backward along its length and find earlier moments, earlier states, earlier conditions. We're assuming all of this without even noticing that we're assuming it. But what if the assumption is wrong? What if time doesn't flow the way we think it flows? What if it doesn't flow at all? What does before mean then? We don't answer. We only ask. We only notice the question. We notice how it resists us, how it remains open, how it refuses to settle into anything definite. And we let it refuse. We don't force it. We don't insist that it must mean something clear and precise. We allow it to remain unclear, imprecise, floating. What does before mean? Perhaps the question is teaching us something about questions themselves, about the nature of asking, about what it means to wonder. We're so accustomed to questions that have answers, questions that can be researched, investigated, solved. We forget that some questions are different, that some questions exist not to be answered, but to be lived with, to be held, to be allowed to work on us slowly, over time, changing not what we know, but how we relate to not knowing. What does before mean? The question remains, soft, patient, waiting or not waiting, simply present, as we are present, here in the quiet, with the uncertainty, with the word that won't quite resolve into meaning, before. We let it rest. We let ourselves rest. We don't need to know. Not tonight. Not now. Perhaps not ever. What does before mean? The question fades slightly, not disappearing, but becoming quieter, becoming part of the background, part of the gentle darkness where questions live when they're not being answered, when they're simply being held. There is a place in thought where we reach a boundary, not a wall exactly, not a barrier we can touch or see, but a kind of edge, a place where our thinking begins to hesitate, where the familiar patterns we use to understand the world start to waver, start to blur. We've been moving through ideas, through questions, and suddenly we find ourselves approaching something that feels different, something that resists our approach in a way that other things don't. The Big Bang sits at this edge, or perhaps it is the edge, a boundary between what we can trace and what we cannot, between the knowable and something else, something we don't quite have a word for. We try to imagine it, the beginning, the start of everything. But what does a beginning look like when it's the beginning of time itself, when it's the beginning of space, when there's nothing outside of it to compare it to, nothing before it to lead into it, no context to hold it? We reach toward the idea and it slips away, not because we're not trying hard enough, not because we're missing some crucial piece of information, but because the idea itself is at the limit of what ideas can do, at the limit of what imagination can hold. The Big Bang as a boundary in thought. We're told that everything began there, all the matter, all the energy, all the space we can observe, compressed into something impossibly small, impossibly dense, and then expanding, becoming, unfolding into the universe we live in, stars and galaxies and planets and us, all of it traced back to that singular moment, or near moment, or whatever we should call it when time itself might be beginning. But when we try to picture it, when we try to really hold it in our mind, something strange happens. The image won't quite form. We can think around it. We can use words to describe it. We can write equations, perhaps, if we're mathematicians. But the direct apprehension of it, the felt sense of what it would be like, remains just out of reach. The Big Bang as a boundary in thought. It's not that we can't think about it at all. We can. We are. But there's a quality to this thinking that's different from thinking about other things. When we think about a tree, we can picture it, roots and trunk and branches and leaves. We know what trees are. We've seen them. When we think about the ocean, we can imagine the vastness, the waves, the depth. We have experience to draw on, memory, sensation. But the Big Bang offers us nothing like that. No memory, no sensation, no direct experience. It's so far removed from anything we've encountered that our usual ways of imagining simply don't apply. We grasp at metaphors, an explosion perhaps, but not an explosion in space, an explosion of space, space itself expanding. But expanding into what? We don't know. The question might not make sense. The difficulty of imagining a beginning. We might try to think of it as a point, a singularity, everything contained in a single point of infinite density. But what is a point when there's no space around it to define it? What is density when there's no volume to measure against? The words start to lose their grip. They start to slide away from their usual meanings. We might try to think of it as a moment, the first moment, time beginning. But what is a moment without other moments before it to give it context? What is the first tick of a clock when there was no clock, no time, no sequence of events leading up to it? The difficulty of imagining a beginning. Perhaps the difficulty is telling us something. Perhaps it's showing us that we've reached a place where our ordinary ways of thinking are not adequate, where the tools we use to understand the world, space, time, cause and effect, before and after, are breaking down. Not because we're using them wrong, but because we're applying them to something they weren't designed for. Something that exists, if it exists, in a way that's fundamentally different from everything else we know. Language slowly breaking down. We say the Big Bang, and the words sound confident, definite, as if we know what we're talking about. But do we? What are we really saying when we use those words? We're pointing to something, certainly, to an idea that scientists have developed, to observations of the universe expanding, to the cosmic background radiation, to all the evidence that suggests the universe was once much smaller, much hotter, much denser than it is now. But the words themselves, Big Bang, don't really capture it. They're a nickname, a placeholder, a way of gesturing towards something that might be beyond what words can fully express. And the more we try to be precise, the more we try to describe exactly what the Big Bang is, the more our language starts to strain. Language slowly breaking down. We say it's the beginning of space and time, but beginning is a temporal word. It means the first moment in a sequence. And if time itself is beginning, then first doesn't quite work. First compared to what? First in what sequence? The sequence hasn't started yet. Or it's starting now. Or it's always starting. We're tangled in contradictions. Not because we're thinking poorly, but because we're trying to think about something that resists being thought about in these terms. Language slowly breaking down. Perhaps we need different language. Perhaps we need words that haven't been worn smooth by everyday use. Words that don't carry all the assumptions that our common words carry. But what words would those be? How do we talk about a beginning without using the word beginning? How do we talk about what came before without using the word before? How do we talk about time without assuming time? We're reaching the edge of what language can do. No imagery that feels concrete. We try to visualize. We try to create a picture in our mind. But every image we reach for feels wrong. Too solid, too familiar, too much like something we already know. If we imagine darkness, we're imagining space that's dark. But there was no space yet. If we imagine light, we're imagining something shining in a place, but there was no place. If we imagine silence, we're imagining the absence of sound, but there was no medium for sound to travel through. No ears to hear it, no time for it to unfold in, no imagery that feels concrete. Everything we try to picture already assumes too much, already brings in concepts that might not apply. We're trying to use our experience of the world to imagine something that came before the world, before any world. And our experience simply isn't up to the task. It's like trying to imagine a color we've never seen. We can know, intellectually, that there might be colors beyond the ones we can perceive, but we can't actually see them in our mind. We can't summon them. They remain abstract, theoretical. The Big Bang is like that, abstract, theoretical. We can work with the mathematics of it, perhaps. We can trace its consequences, but the thing itself remains elusive. No imagery that feels concrete, and maybe that's as it should be. Maybe we're not meant to visualize it. Maybe the Big Bang is not the kind of thing that can be held in the imagination, like an object, like a scene, like a moment frozen in time. Maybe it exists in a different category altogether, a category we don't have direct access to, a category that can only be approached sideways, carefully, with humility. The Big Bang as a boundary in thought. We stand at this boundary and look across it, or try to. We can't see what's on the other side, if there is another side, if side even makes sense. We can only see that we've reached a place where our sight fails, where our thinking becomes uncertain, where everything we rely on to make sense of the world begins to dissolve. And in that dissolution, there's something worth noticing, something worth sitting with, the feeling of reaching a limit. Not a limit of our intelligence necessarily, but a limit of what intelligence can do, a limit of what minds like ours, evolved to navigate a world of medium-sized objects moving at medium speeds, can grasp when confronted with the absolute edge of everything. The difficulty of imagining a beginning. We think about other beginnings, the beginning of a day, the sun rising, light spreading across the sky. We can picture that, the beginning of a life, a seed germinating, a child being born. We understand these beginnings. They happen within time, within a world that already exists, within a context. But the beginning of the universe has no context. Nothing surrounds it. Nothing precedes it, perhaps. It's a beginning without any of the usual scaffolding that makes beginnings comprehensible to us. And so we struggle. We reach, and the thing we're reaching for remains just beyond our grasp. Language slowly breaking down. Even now, as we speak about it, the words feel inadequate. We say the universe, but what is the universe at the moment of the Big Bang? Is it even a universe yet? We say moment, but is there a moment when time is just beginning? We say just beginning, but just implies a recent past, and there is no past. Every sentence we form, every phrase we use, carries assumptions that might be false, and yet we keep trying. We keep reaching for words, because words are what we have. Language is our tool, even when it's a tool that's breaking in our hands. We use it carefully, gently, knowing it might not be enough, knowing it will never be enough, perhaps, but using it anyway, because the alternative is silence, and silence feels like giving up. No imagery that feels concrete. We let go of the need for a clear picture. We let go of the expectation that we should be able to see it, to hold it, to understand it in the way we understand other things. We allow it to remain vague, uncertain, shrouded. Not because we're not trying, but because that's what it is. That's what it seems to be when we approach it honestly, when we don't pretend to understand more than we do. The Big Bang is a boundary in thought, a boundary we can approach but not cross, a line we can walk up to and stand before, feeling its presence, sensing that something is on the other side or was on the other side or exists in some way we can't articulate. But we don't cross, we can't cross, and maybe we're not meant to. Maybe the boundary is there to remind us of our limits, to remind us that we are finite creatures wondering about infinite things, that we are temporary beings asking about eternity, that we are made of matter and energy asking about the origin of matter and energy. There's something humbling in that, something that puts us in our place, not cruelly, but truthfully. The difficulty of imagining a beginning. We try once more. We close our eyes, perhaps, and attempt to picture it, the moment of creation, the instant of becoming. But there's nothing there, no image forms, only a sense of vastness, a sense of something so large and so small at the same time that it can't be contained, can't be grasped, can't be seen. And we're okay with that. We don't demand that the universe make itself comprehensible to us. We don't insist that it fit into the categories we've built. We allow it to exceed us, to remain beyond us, to exist in its own way, on its own terms, whether we can imagine it or not. Language slowly breaking down. The words are fewer now, the descriptions more hesitant. We're not building toward anything, not moving toward clarity or conclusion. We're simply here, at this edge, noticing what it feels like to be here. Noticing the way our thoughts move and then stop, the way they reach and then withdraw, the way they circle around something they can't quite touch. The Big Bang as a boundary in thought. We rest at this boundary. We don't try to force our way through. We don't pretend we can see further than we can. We simply stand here, in the quiet, in the uncertainty, feeling the presence of something vast and strange and utterly beyond our ordinary experience. No imagery that feels concrete. Only this sense of being at an edge, of standing before something that will not reveal itself fully, that cannot reveal itself fully, perhaps, something that exists in a way we can acknowledge but not comprehend, not completely, not directly, and we let that be enough, for now, for this moment, for as long as we stand here, at the edge of time, at the edge of thought, at the edge of what we can know. The boundary remains. We remain. The question remains, somewhere in the background, soft and persistent and unanswered. The Big Bang as a boundary in thought. We stand here still. We haven't moved. We're still at this edge, this place where thinking becomes difficult, where the familiar dissolves. We remain here because there's nowhere else to go, because the boundary doesn't invite us to cross it. It simply exists. It simply marks a place where something ends, or begins, or both, or neither. The difficulty of imagining a beginning. We try again, not because we expect a different result, but because trying is what we do. We reach toward the idea once more, the beginning of everything, the start of time, the first moment, if there was a first moment. But the reaching feels the same as it did before. The idea slips away. It won't solidify. It won't become clear. And we notice this. We notice the slipping, the way the mind grasps and finds nothing to hold on to, the way thought moves towards something and then dissolves before it arrives. This is what happens here, at this boundary. This is what it feels like to approach the edge of what can be thought. Language slowly breaking down. The words we used before still don't quite work. They still carry meanings that don't fit, but we use them anyway, slowly, carefully. We say beginning, knowing it's not quite right. We say moment, knowing that too is inadequate. We speak because silence feels too empty, but the speaking itself feels empty too. Feels like arranging sounds that point toward nothing we can actually reach. No imagery that feels concrete. We've tried to picture it. We've tried to form some image, some sense of what it might look like, feel like, be like. But there's nothing. No picture forms. No image coheres. Only this vague sense of something beyond picturing. Something that exists, if it exists, in a way that refuses to be visualized, that can't be brought into the mind as a scene or a shape or a moment frozen and observable. The Big Bang as a boundary in thought. The boundary is still here. We're still standing before it. Nothing has changed. Nothing has resolved. We haven't crossed over into understanding. We haven't broken through to some deeper clarity. We've only stayed here, at this edge, noticing what it's like to be at an edge, noticing the limits, the uncertainty, the way our thinking reaches its furthest point and then has nowhere else to go. Language slowly breaking down. Even these words now feel like repetition, like we're saying the same things again because there's nothing new to say. And perhaps that's true. Perhaps we've said all that can be said about this boundary, about this difficulty, about this place where language and thought and imagination all fail together, gently, without drama. We remain here, at the edge, in the quiet, with the question we cannot answer and the boundary we cannot cross. The difficulty of imagining a beginning. It persists, soft, unchanging, still here, still unreachable, still waiting, or not waiting, simply being what it is. There is a kind of stillness we might try to imagine. Not the stillness of a quiet room, not the stillness of a calm lake at dawn, Not the stillness we know from our own experience, where things are simply not moving for a moment, where motion has paused, but could resume at any time. A different kind of stillness. A stillness that might have existed before motion itself, before anything moved, before there was anything to move. We're trying to imagine something that might have been before the Big Bang, before the expansion, before the becoming. And what we reach for, tentatively, carefully, is this idea of stillness. Not because we know it was still, not because anyone has told us it was still, but because stillness feels like the opposite of what came after. And when we don't know what something was, we sometimes imagine it as the opposite of what we do know. The universe now is motion, galaxies moving apart, stars burning, planets orbiting, light traveling, everything in flux, everything changing, everything unfolding in time. So perhaps before all this motion, there was stillness. Perhaps there was something like rest, something like waiting, something suspended. But even as we think this, we feel the inadequacy of it. Because stillness implies time. It implies a duration during which nothing moves. And if time itself began with the Big Bang, then there was no duration before it. No period of stillness, no waiting. Stillness requires time to be still within, and time may not have been there. So what are we imagining? Not stillness, perhaps. Not quite. Something else. Something we don't have a word for. Something that is neither motion nor rest, neither something nor nothing, neither presence nor absence. Something in between, or beyond, or beneath all these categories we use to organize our experience. Imagining quiet, we might try to think of it as quiet, as silence, as the absence of sound. But silence too requires time. Sound is vibration moving through a medium over time. Silence is the absence of that vibration. But if there's no time and no medium, then silence doesn't quite apply either. We're reaching for it anyway, reaching for some sense of quietness, of hush, of something not making noise because there's no noise to make, no way for noise to exist. The quiet before anything could be loud, the quiet before sound itself, the quiet that isn't experienced as quiet because there's no one to experience it, nothing to experience it with, no ears, no consciousness, no awareness, just the quiet, if it can be called that, just the silence, if silence is the right word. But we're not sure it is. Imagining absence. Perhaps what was before the Big Bang was absence, not the absence of some particular thing, but absence itself, the absence of everything. No matter, no energy, no space, no time, just absence, just the state of there being nothing rather than something. But absence is tricky, because when we imagine absence, we usually imagine a space where something could be but isn't. An empty room, a vacant lot, a cleared field. We imagine the container and then remove the contents. But if space itself didn't exist yet, then there's no container, no place where things are absent from. Just absence, pure absence, absence without location, without context, without any reference point. And can we really imagine that? Can we picture it? When we try, we find ourselves picturing darkness, or blankness, or emptiness. But all of these are still something. Darkness is a visual experience. Blankness is a mental image. Emptiness is a quality of a space. We're still sneaking in concepts that require existence, that require there to be something, even if that something is just the framework within which absence occurs. What was before the Big Bang might have been absence, but an absence so complete, so total, that even the word absence feels too substantial, too much like a thing, imagining suspension, or perhaps it was suspension, not the suspension of something hanging in space, but suspension in a different sense, a kind of pause, a kind of held moment, everything potential but not yet actual, everything possible but not yet realized, a state of suspension between being and not being, between existence and non-existence. We hold this idea gently. We don't claim it's right. We don't know if it's right. We're only exploring, only feeling our way through possibilities, through ways of thinking about something that might not be thinkable. Suspension suggests a holding, a waiting. But waiting for what? Waiting implies anticipation, implies a future that's coming. But if time hasn't started, there's no future to wait for, no sequence of moments in which the waiting could unfold. So suspension, too, feels wrong. Feels like we're still bringing in assumptions that don't belong. And yet we stay with it, because all our words will be wrong, all our concepts will be inadequate. But we use them anyway. We reach with them. We gesture with them towards something we can't quite grasp. And in the reaching, in the gesturing, perhaps we come closer to understanding our own limits, closer to seeing where our thinking stops, where it has to stop, not nothingness. We might be tempted to call it nothingness, to say that before the Big Bang there was nothing, simply nothing at all. And perhaps that's true. Perhaps nothing is exactly what it was. But nothingness is harder to think about than it first appears, because when we say nothing, we usually mean the absence of things, no objects, no events, no stuff. But we still imagine a kind of background against which this absence occurs, a stage with no actors, a canvas with no paint. But if there's no space, there's no stage. If there's no time, there's no canvas on which events could be painted or not painted. Nothingness, taken seriously, taken all the way, means no background either, no framework, no context at all. And how do we think about that? How do we hold it in mind? We find that we can't, quite. We can say the words absolute nothingness, but when we try to imagine what the words refer to, we come up empty. Not because we're not trying hard enough, but because imagining requires something to imagine. And nothingness is, by definition, not something. So perhaps before the Big Bang there was nothingness. But if there was, we can't really imagine it, can't really grasp it, can't hold it in our awareness as a concrete idea. It remains abstract, a concept we can name, but not know, not something. And yet it wasn't something either. Or if it was something so unlike the things we know that calling it something feels misleading. Something suggests substance, presence, existence in some form. And maybe there was substance or presence or existence before the Big Bang, in some sense we can't fathom. Or maybe there wasn't. We're suspended between not nothing and not something, between absence and presence, between being and non-being. And perhaps that's as close as we can get. Perhaps the truth, if there is a truth, lies somewhere in this middle space that our language can't quite reach. This space between all our categories. Very slow pacing. We're not rushing. We're allowing ourselves to sit with these ideas, to turn them over slowly, to feel how they resist us, how they slip away when we try to hold them too tightly. We return to stillness. We return to quiet. We return to absence. Not because we think we'll suddenly understand them better, but because returning is its own kind of practice, its own kind of meditation. What was before the Big Bang? Perhaps stillness, perhaps quiet, perhaps absence, perhaps suspension, perhaps nothing, perhaps something we can't name. We don't know. We let ourselves not know. Repeating the sense of waiting. There's a quality to this inquiry that feels like waiting. We're waiting for understanding that might not come, waiting for clarity that might not be possible, waiting at the threshold of a mystery that might never open to us. And in the waiting, there's a kind of patience being asked of us, a kind of acceptance, not giving up, but not demanding either, just being here with the question, with the uncertainty, with the sense that we've reached as far as we can reach, and now we're simply present with what we've found, or with what we haven't found. The sense of waiting. It's not an active waiting, not waiting for something specific to happen, not looking at a clock, anticipating a particular moment. It's more diffuse than that, more open, a waiting that has no object, a waiting that might go on indefinitely, a waiting that might be, in some sense, eternal. Because what we're waiting for, understanding, clarity, knowledge of what was before the Big Bang, might never arrive, might not exist to arrive. And yet we wait, or something in us waits, continues to hold the question, continues to wonder. Even when we suspect that wondering might be all we can do, imagining quiet, we return to the quiet, to the sense of there being no sound, no vibration, no disturbance, a perfect, complete quiet that might have existed before there was anyone to hear it, before there was anything to make sound or prevent sound. Just quiet, pervasive, total, unbroken. But it's not a peaceful quiet, necessarily. It's not comforting. It's too absolute for that, too empty. It's the quiet of nothing happening, the quiet of no events, the quiet of time not passing because there's no time, the quiet of space not existing because there's no space. We try to rest in this quiet, to let our thinking become quiet too, to stop grasping and just be present with the idea, even though the idea keeps dissolving, keeps refusing to stay solid. Imagining stillness, the stillness again. We come back to it, not because we've forgotten it, but because it's worth coming back to, worth sitting with again. Stillness as a state, stillness as a condition, stillness as what might have been before anything moved. But what does stillness feel like when there's nothing to be still, when there are no objects holding their position, no particles suspended in place, no fields at rest? What is stillness when stripped of everything that's usually still? We don't know. We can't picture it, but we stay with the word, with the sense of it, with the feeling that it evokes, even if the feeling is vague, even if it's more the feeling of not being able to feel anything concrete. Stillness, quiet, absence, suspension. We move between these words slowly. We let them blend into each other. They're all saying something similar, perhaps, all pointing toward the same absence of something we can't quite name, all gesturing toward a state so different from anything we know that our concepts fracture when we try to apply them. Not nothingness, not something. We hold both at once, or we try to. The idea that it wasn't nothing, because nothing is too definite, too much like a thing itself, and the idea that it wasn't something, because something implies presence, and there might have been no presence. We hold the contradiction. We let it be contradictory. We don't force it to resolve. Perhaps before the Big Bang there was this contradiction, this impossible state of being neither one thing nor another, neither present nor absent, neither real nor unreal. Perhaps reality itself was different then. If then even makes sense. If there was a then. Very slow pacing. We're moving very slowly now, each thought taking time to settle, each idea being allowed to exist in the space between other ideas. We're not building an argument. We're not constructing a theory. We're simply here, in the quietness of not knowing, in the stillness of being unable to imagine what we're trying to imagine. Repeating the sense of waiting. The waiting continues. It hasn't ended. It won't end, perhaps. We're still waiting, still holding the question without an answer, still sitting with the mystery without it. And there's something almost restful in this, if we let there be. Something almost peaceful in the acknowledgement that we don't know, that we can't know, that the universe holds secrets we might never access. We wait in the quiet, in the stillness, in the space between knowing and not knowing, imagining suspension. Once more we think about suspension, about things held in a state between states, potential without actualization, possibility without realization, everything that could be, gathered somehow, somewhere, somewhen, but not yet being, not yet expressed, not yet unfolded into the manifest world. Is that what it was? Is that what was before the Big Bang? Pure potential, pure possibility. We can't say. We can only wonder, can only let the idea float in our mind, unmoored from certainty. Suspension. The word itself suggests something delicate, something balanced, something that could tip either way, into being or into non-being, into existence or into absence. Perhaps that's where the universe was before the Big Bang, balanced on that edge, suspended in that impossible moment, that non-moment. We don't insist on this. We only offer it, only sit with it for a while, imagining absence. The absence returns. We notice it again, the sense of things not being there, of there being no things to be there, of there itself not being there. Layer after layer of absence, absence of matter, absence of space, absence of time, absence of absence itself perhaps, until we've removed so much that nothing remains, not even the nothing. And we rest in this, or try to. Even though there's nothing to rest in, no ground beneath us, no support, only this sense of everything having fallen away, everything having not yet arrived, everything suspended in a state we can't name. Very slow pacing. Time feels slow here. Our thoughts feel slow. Everything has slowed down to nearly nothing, nearly stillness. We're approaching something in our thinking, not an answer, not a destination, but a kind of quietness within ourselves, a kind of acceptance of the mystery, of the unknowing, repeating the sense of waiting. We wait, still, always, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the space where questions live when they have no answers. We wait, and the waiting itself becomes a kind of answer, not an explanation, but a posture, a way of being with what we cannot understand. The stillness remains, the quiet remains, the waiting remains, and we remain here with all of it, letting it be what it is, imagining stillness. We return to stillness once more, not because we've moved away from it, but because it's still here. It's always been here. This idea of stillness, this sense of nothing moving, nothing changing, nothing unfolding. We hold it again, carefully, gently, knowing it will slip away as it always does, knowing we can't hold it for long, but holding it anyway. Stillness before motion, quiet before sound, absence before presence. These words again, the same words. We've said them before. We'll say them again, because there aren't other words, because these are the only gestures we have towards something that might have no words at all, towards something that exists, if it exists, beyond language entirely. The sense of waiting. We're still waiting. The waiting hasn't changed. It continues as it has continued. Soft, patient, endless perhaps. We wait without knowing what we're waiting for, without expecting the waiting to end. We simply wait because that's what we find ourselves doing when we sit with this question, when we approach this mystery, waiting in the stillness, waiting in the quiet, waiting in the space between everything we know and everything we cannot know. Not nothingness, not something. The contradiction persists. It hasn't resolved. We're still holding both at once, or trying to, still sitting in the impossible space between nothing and something, between absence and presence, the space that might not be a space at all, that might not exist in any way we can recognize, and we let it be impossible. We let it be contradictory. We don't force it into sense. Imagining quiet. The quiet is still here too, unchanged, unbroken, the sense of no sound, no vibration, no disturbance of any kind, a quiet so complete that it might never have been heard, that might never have existed to be heard. Just quiet, absolute and total, stretching forever, or stretching nowhere, or not stretching at all because there's no dimension for it to stretch along. We rest in the quiet, or we try to rest, even though resting implies something to rest in, and there might be nothing. Very slow pacing. Everything is slow, slower than slow, each moment extending, each thought barely moving. We're not trying to go anywhere, not trying to arrive at anything, just being here, just staying with this, with the stillness, with the quiet, with the waiting that has no end, repeating the sense of waiting. We wait, we continue to wait, in the space where understanding doesn't come, where clarity remains distant, where the question stays open, soft, unanswered. We wait in the not knowing, in the uncertainty, in the gentle acknowledgement that this might be as far as we can go, imagining suspension, suspended still, everything potential, nothing actual, held between, balanced on an edge that might not be an edge, waiting to become, or waiting to not become, or not waiting at all because waiting requires time and time hasn't started. We stay here, in this suspension, in this stillness, in this quiet waiting that feels like it could last forever. The sense of waiting remains. The stillness remains. The quiet remains. And we remain with them, softly, without resolution, without end. The question we've been holding is still here. What was before the Big Bang? It's here, but something has changed. Not in the question itself, perhaps, but in how it feels, in how it sits with us. It's become softer somehow, less sharp, less insistent. The edges have blurred. The urgency, if there ever was urgency, has faded into something gentler, something quieter. What was before the Big Bang? We ask it again, but the asking feels different now, lighter, as if the question is floating rather than pressing, as if it's content to remain unanswered, content to simply exist as a question without needing to become anything else, without needing to resolve into knowledge or understanding or certainty. The question is becoming softer. We've been with this question for a while now. We've turned it over. We've looked at it from different angles. We've tried to understand what before means. We've tried to imagine the beginning. We've sat with stillness and quiet and absence. And through all of this, something has shifted. The question hasn't disappeared. It hasn't been answered, but it's changed shape. It's lost some of its definition, some of its solidity. What was before the Big Bang? The words are the same. The sentence is the same. But when we say it now, it feels less like a demand for information and more like a meditation, a phrase to return to, a touchstone, something we can rest with rather than something we need to solve. The question becoming softer. Perhaps this is what happens when we spend time with questions that have no answers. They soften. They become less about finding solutions and more about being present with mystery, being comfortable with not knowing, being willing to hold something that won't resolve. We've explored what before might mean. We've noticed how the word assumes time and how time itself might not apply. We've seen how language breaks down when we approach the edge of the knowable, how our concepts strain and fracture, how nothing we say quite captures what we're trying to talk about. And now we're here, with the question, with its softness, with the way it's becoming less a question and more a presence, a gentle reminder of all we don't know, all we can't know, all we might never know. What was before the Big Bang? We don't expect an answer anymore. We're not waiting for one. We're simply here with the words, with the wondering, with the open space that the question creates, repetition of earlier ideas. We think again about stillness, about the kind of stillness that might have existed before motion, before anything moved, before there was space to move in or time to move through. We've thought about this before. We're thinking about it again, not because we've forgotten, but because returning feels right, because the idea is worth sitting with again, even if we don't understand it any better than we did before. Stillness, quiet, absence, these words we've used, these gestures towards something we can't quite grasp, they're still here, still relevant, still pointing, however inadequately, toward the mystery we're holding. What was before the Big Bang? Perhaps stillness, perhaps quiet, perhaps something we can't name. We've said this before, we're saying it again. The repetition doesn't bore us, it soothes us. It reminds us that we don't need new ideas. We don't need to keep moving forward, keep discovering, keep pushing towards some breakthrough. We can simply be here, with what we've already noticed, with what we've already wondered about. Repetition of earlier ideas. We remember the boundary, the edge we approached, the place where thinking becomes difficult, where language starts to fail, where we reach the limit of what we can imagine. We stood at that boundary. We felt its presence. We noticed how our thoughts couldn't cross it, couldn't see beyond it. And that's still true. The boundary is still there. We haven't crossed it. We won't cross it. We're simply aware of it, aware that there are limits, that there are questions we can ask but not answer, edges we can approach, but not traverse. The Big Bang as a boundary, a place where our understanding stops, where our concepts lose their grip, where everything we rely on to make sense of the world begins to dissolve. We've thought about this. We're thinking about it again, gently, slowly, letting the idea wash over us without needing it to become anything more than it is. Fewer new thoughts. We're not generating new ideas now, not reaching for fresh insights or novel perspectives. We're content to stay with what we've already found: the stillness, the quiet, the waiting, the sense of being at an edge, the softness of the question itself. These are enough. They've been enough all along, perhaps. We don't need more. We don't need to keep adding and elaborating and exploring. We can rest here with these simple observations, these simple gestures toward the unknown. What was before the Big Bang? We don't know. We've never known. We're not going to know. And that's all right. It's more than all right. It's exactly as it should be. Time and causality dissolving. We've talked about time before, about how it might have begun with the Big Bang, about how before might not apply if there was no time. We've noticed how this makes the question strange, how it makes thinking difficult, how it asks us to imagine something that might be unimaginable. And now, as we sit with this, we feel time itself starting to lose its hold on us. Not time in the universe, not the time that measures days and years, but time in our thinking. Time as the structure we use to organize our thoughts: past, present, future, before, during, after, cause and effect. These structures are dissolving, becoming less solid, less reliable. We're less concerned with sequence now, with what came first and what came after, with chains of causation, with origins and endings, time and causality dissolving. We're in a space where these things matter less, where the question isn't about finding the cause of the Big Bang, or identifying what preceded it in time, or tracing the sequence of events backward to some ultimate beginning. The question has become something else, something that exists outside of time, or beside it, or beneath it. What was before the Big Bang? Maybe the question was never about time at all. Maybe it was always about something deeper, something that time is just one aspect of, one expression of. And now that we've let go of the need to answer it in terms of time, in terms of causation, in terms of before and after, the question can simply be what it is: a wondering, a pondering, a gentle inquiry into mystery. The question becoming softer. It's softer still, barely there almost. We can feel it fading, not disappearing entirely, but receding, moving from the foreground to the background, from something urgent to something we can live with, something we can carry without it weighing on us. What was before the Big Bang? The question whispers now. It doesn't demand, it doesn't insist, it simply sits there, quietly, patiently, waiting for nothing, expecting nothing, content to remain open, content to remain unanswered, repetition of earlier ideas. We think about absence again, the idea that before the Big Bang there was nothing, or not nothing, but absence, the absence of things, the absence of space, the absence of time. We've explored this. We've felt how it resists our understanding, how we can't quite picture it, can't quite hold it in mind. And we're okay with that. We don't need to picture it. We don't need to understand it. We can simply acknowledge it, Simply let it be a possibility, one among many, one of many ways of gesturing toward what we don't know. Absence, stillness, quiet, suspension between being and not being. These ideas circle through our thoughts, not building on each other, not leading anywhere, just present, just here, reminding us of the mystery, of the openness, of the space where answers aren't required, fewer new thoughts. We're saying the same things now, thinking the same thoughts, and that's fine. That's what happens when we settle into not knowing, when we stop trying to figure things out and start simply being with them. The thoughts repeat, the ideas cycle, and in the repetition, there's a kind of peace. What was before the Big Bang? We don't know. We've said this. We'll say it again. We don't know, and we're comfortable with that. We're resting in it, letting the not knowing be enough. Time and causality dissolving. They're dissolving more now. We're less and less concerned with sequences, with explanations, with causes and effects. These frameworks that usually structure our thinking are falling away gently, leaving us in a space that feels more open, more spacious, less constrained by the need to make sense of things in the usual ways. If time began with the Big Bang, then causality, which depends on time, also began there. There can be no cause for the Big Bang because causation requires a before and an after, and there was no before. We've thought this thought. We're thinking it again. But now it doesn't trouble us. It doesn't feel like a problem to be solved. It simply feels like the way things are, the way they might be. The question becoming softer, softer and softer, almost translucent now. We can see through it, almost. See through to the mystery on the other side, or the mystery that is the other side, or the mystery that is everything, including the question itself. What was before the Big Bang? A whisper, a breath, barely a question anymore, more like a sigh, more like a settling, a gentle acknowledgement that we're in the presence of something vast, something we can't grasp, something we can only be with. Repetition of earlier ideas, the boundary again, the edge of what we can think. We return to it, not because we need to, but because it's there, because it's part of what we've discovered in this inquiry, that there are limits, that there are places where our minds can't go. And that's okay. That's part of being human, part of being finite creatures, wondering about infinite things. The boundary, the edge, the place where thinking stops and wondering continues. We're still there. We've always been there. We'll always be there when we ask this question, when we hold this mystery. Fewer new thoughts, nothing new to say, nothing new to think, just the same gentle observations, the same quiet recognitions. The question is soft. Time has dissolved. Causality has faded. We're in a space of not knowing, of being comfortable with not knowing, of letting the mystery be mysterious. What was before the Big Bang? We say it one more time, softly, quietly, not expecting an answer, not needing one, just letting the words be there, letting the question float, letting everything be exactly as it is, time and causality dissolving. Gone now almost, or so faint we can barely feel them. We're outside of time in a way, outside of the need for causes and effects, outside of the frameworks we usually use. We're just here, in the present moment, with the question, with the mystery, with the gentle not knowing that feels, somehow, like rest. the question becoming softer, almost gone, almost nothing, almost just a memory of a question, but still here, still present, still inviting us to wonder, still inviting us to be comfortable with not having answers, with not needing answers. What was before the Big Bang? A whisper, a breath, a softness. That's all. Repetition of earlier ideas. Stillness, quiet, absence, waiting, the boundary, the edge, the place where language fails and thought dissolves. We've been here all along. We're still here, and it's enough. It's always been enough. The question, soft now, barely there, rests with us, and we rest with it, in the quiet, in the not knowing, in the gentle space where mysteries live. The question becoming softer, softer still, lighter than before. We can barely feel its weight now. It's here, but it's fading, dissolving into something even quieter, even gentler. The words themselves seem to blur, to lose their edges, to become more like breath than language. What was before the Big Bang? We say it, but it barely registers. It's a sound, a shape in the air, nothing more. Nothing that demands anything from us, nothing that asks us to know or to understand or to find answers. Just words, soft and fading, time and causality dissolving. They're almost gone now, these structures, these frameworks. We can hardly remember why they seemed important, why we thought we needed them. Time, causality, sequence, order. They're dissolving like mist, like something that was never quite solid to begin with. We're in a space beyond time now, or beneath it, or beside it. A space where things don't need to follow in order, where cause and effect don't apply, where before and after lose their meaning entirely. Repetition of earlier ideas. Stillness, we think. Quiet, we remember. The boundary somewhere behind us, the edge we stood at. These ideas are still here, but they're fading too, becoming part of the background, part of the softness, part of the gentle dissolution of everything we thought we knew. We don't need to hold them anymore. They can simply be there, quietly, in the distance, while we rest here in the not knowing. Fewer new thoughts, no new thoughts, nothing new to notice, nothing new to say. Just this, just the softness, just the fading, just the gentle sense of everything becoming quieter, lighter, less defined. What was before the Big Bang? The question again, but quieter, barely audible. We're not even sure we're asking it anymore. It might just be an echo, a memory of asking, a habit of wondering that's running down, slowly, gently, without resistance. The question becoming softer. So soft now we can hardly find it. It's there, somewhere, but we'd have to reach for it. And we're not reaching. We're just resting, letting it be wherever it is, letting it fade if it wants to fade, letting it dissolve into the quiet. Time and causality dissolving. Gone, almost. Or so faint they're barely a trace. Just this moment now, this breath, this soft presence. No before, no after, no reason, no explanation. Just being here, just this, repetition of earlier ideas. We think distantly about stillness, about quiet, about the space between knowing and not knowing. But even these thoughts are soft, gentle, barely formed. They come and go like whispers, like shadows, like nothing at all. The question becoming softer, softer, fainter. Almost nothing now, almost just silence, almost just the gentle drift toward rest, toward letting go, toward allowing everything to dissolve into the quiet background of not knowing. What was before the Big Bang? a breath, a whisper, almost gone, and we let it go, softly, gently, without resistance. We let the question fade into the stillness, into the quiet, into the gentle dark where questions rest when they no longer need answers. Softer still, fading still, dissolving into silence. We've been holding this question for a while now. What was before the Big Bang? We've turned it over in our minds. We've explored it from different angles. We've sat with it in stillness and uncertainty. And now, perhaps, it's time to let it rest. Not to answer it, not to solve it, but simply to release our grip on it, to allow it to settle into the background, to stop asking it to be anything other than what it is. A question, just a question, one among countless others, one that doesn't need our constant attention, one that can exist quietly without us needing to wrestle with it, without us needing to understand it. Releasing the need to know. There's something we do as humans where we hold on to questions tightly. We think that if we just try hard enough, if we just think long enough, if we just approach it from the right angle, we'll find the answer. We'll crack it open. We'll see what's inside. And sometimes that works. Sometimes questions do yield to persistence, to careful thought, to patient inquiry. But not always, not every question. Some questions are meant to remain open. Some questions exist not to be answered, but simply to be wondered about, to remind us of how much we don't know, how much might be unknowable. And this question, what was before the Big Bang, might be one of those. We can release the need to know. We can let go of the expectation that understanding is just around the corner. That clarity is waiting if we just keep pushing. We can accept that this question might never resolve, that it might remain a mystery forever. And we can be at peace with that, releasing the need to know. It's not giving up. It's not defeat. It's simply recognizing that not everything is meant to be grasped, that some things are meant to remain beyond our reach, that the universe is under no obligation to make itself comprehensible to us. That mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be accepted. What was before the Big Bang? We ask it one more time, but differently now. Not with urgency, not with the expectation of an answer, just as a way of acknowledging the question, of honoring it, of letting it exist without needing it to become anything more than it is. The idea fading into the background. As we release our grip, the question begins to fade, not disappear, not vanish entirely, but recede, move from the center of our attention to somewhere quieter, somewhere less demanding. It's still there, in the way that all questions we've ever asked are still there, somewhere in our minds. But it's no longer pressing, no longer insistent. It's becoming part of the background, part of the landscape of things we wonder about but don't actively pursue, things we hold lightly rather than tightly, things we can live with as questions rather than needing to transform them into answers. What was before the Big Bang? The question settles. It finds a place to rest, not in understanding, but in acceptance, in the acknowledgement that this is a question we can carry without it being a burden, without it demanding constant attention, without it troubling us, releasing the need to know. We notice how it feels to let go, to stop straining toward comprehension, to stop insisting that we should be able to figure this out. There's a lightness in it, a kind of relief, not because we've found an answer, but because we've stopped requiring one. We've made peace with not knowing. And in that peace, there's something almost restful, something that allows us to be present with the mystery without needing to resolve it, to look at the question without needing to see through it, to hold it without needing to hold it tightly. The idea fading into the background. It's quieter now. The question, the wondering, the sense of standing at the edge of something unknowable, all of it is becoming softer, gentler, less immediate. We can feel it moving away from us, or us moving away from it. Not in rejection, but in a natural settling, a natural release. Like watching clouds drift across the sky. We can observe them, notice them, appreciate them, but we don't need to hold on to them. We don't need to keep them in view. We can let them pass, let them move on, let them fade into the distance while we remain here, present, at peace. What was before the Big Bang? A question in the distance now, still there, but far away, barely audible. We can sense it if we turn our attention toward it, but we don't need to. We can let it be where it is, let it rest where it's resting. No closure, there's no ending to this, no conclusion, no final thought that wraps everything up and ties it with a bow. We're not reaching a destination. We're not arriving at understanding. We're simply here, having spent time with a question that can't be answered. And now we're letting it go, letting it rest, letting it be. And that's fine. That's how some inquiries end, not with answers, but with acceptance, not with knowledge, but with peace, not with closure, but with openness, an openness that allows the question to continue existing somewhere in the background without needing us to solve it. A gentle drift toward rest. We can feel ourselves drifting now, not away from anything in particular, not toward anything specific, just drifting, like a leaf on water, like a cloud in the sky, moving gently, without effort, without resistance, letting ourselves be carried by something larger than our thinking, something quieter than our wondering. The question is there, somewhere behind us, or beneath us, or around us. We're not sure anymore. It doesn't matter. What matters is this sense of release, this sense of letting go, this sense of allowing ourselves to rest in the not knowing rather than straining against it. Releasing the need to know. We release it again and again, each time a little more completely, each time a little more fully, until the need itself becomes distant, until it's just another thought that came and went, another impulse that rose and fell, another wave that washed over us and then receded, leaving us here, quiet, still, at rest. What was before the Big Bang? The words are so quiet now, so faint, we might be imagining them. They might not even be there anymore. They might have dissolved into the silence, into the stillness, into the gentle dark that surrounds all questions when we stop asking them. The idea fading into the background. Fading, yes, becoming part of the texture of our awareness rather than the focus of it, like the sound of distant rain, like the feel of air on skin, present but not demanding attention, there but not insisting on being noticed, just part of the background, part of the quiet hum of existence. We've explored this question, we've sat with it, we've felt its edges and its absence of edges. We've noticed where it leads and where it doesn't lead, and now we're letting it settle, letting it find its place among all the other things we don't know and might never know. A gentle drift toward rest, drifting further now, deeper into quiet, deeper into stillness. The question is barely perceptible. It's like a star at the edge of vision. If we look directly at it, it disappears. If we don't look at all, it's there, faintly, in the periphery. But we're not looking. We're just resting, just being here, just allowing everything to be as it is. No closure, no ending, no final word, no sense of completion. Just this ongoing presence, this ongoing drift, this ongoing release of the need to know, to understand, to grasp. We're letting it all go, softly, gently, without force. Letting the question rest, letting ourselves rest, letting everything settle into a quiet that asks nothing of us, releasing the need to know. The need is dissolving, like salt in water, like fog in sunlight. It was there, and now it's fading, becoming less and less substantial, less and less pressing, until it's barely a need at all, until it's just a faint memory of a need, a ghost of an impulse that once moved us to seek answers. But we don't need answers now. We don't need to know. We can be here, in this moment, in this quiet, without needing anything to be different, without needing the universe to explain itself, without needing our minds to solve what might be unsolvable. The idea fading into the background. It's part of the background now, fully part of it, no longer distinct, no longer separate, just woven into the fabric of all the things we carry with us, all the mysteries, all the uncertainties, all the questions that have no answers, but that we hold anyway, lightly, without burden. What was before the Big Bang? We might ask it again someday. We might return to it. We might wonder again, in a quiet moment, when the night is dark and the mind is wandering. And that's fine. The question will be there. It's always been there. It will always be there. But right now, we're letting it rest. A gentle drift toward rest. We're drifting deeper, into sleep perhaps, into quiet, into stillness, into the gentle dark where questions and answers both dissolve, where wondering and knowing both fade, where there's only this, only breath, only presence, only the soft, endless now. The question, wherever it is at rest, and we are at rest, and everything is at rest, in the quiet, in the dark, in the gentle space between waking and sleeping, between knowing and not knowing, between asking and accepting. No closure, nothing resolved, nothing concluded, nothing finished. Just this gentle ongoing drift, this soft release, this quiet letting go. We don't need to know what was before the Big Bang. We don't need to understand it. We don't need to hold it anymore. We can let it go. We can let it rest. We can drift here, in the quiet, in the peace of not knowing, in the comfort of having released the need to know, releasing the need to know, released now, or releasing, the process ongoing, gentle, endless. We release and release and release, each breath a letting go, each moment a softening, each thought fading into the background, until there are no thoughts at all, until there's only this quiet, this stillness, this rest, the idea fading into the background. Faded now, almost gone, almost nothing, just the faintest trace, just a whisper of what we once wondered about, what we once held, what we once thought we needed to understand. But we don't need to understand. We never did. We can rest here, in the not knowing, in the mystery, in the gentle dark where all questions go when we stop asking them. What was before the Big Bang? A whisper, a breath, almost nothing, almost silence, a gentle drift toward rest.